and her dog comes into she had a bunch of dogs, and her dog comes in and starts to kind of, get up on her. And I don't know what was happening with Jacqueline, but the dog was going right for the Y. I mean, it was out of control.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Manopause Manopod podcast with two great special guests here. Funny story, I met one of them at a restaurant the other night and hit it off and found out that these two gentlemen, our guests, David Fantle and Tom Johnson, wrote this great book called Hollywood Heyday. And so I said to Tom, hey, let me get a hold of that book and read through it and see if there's a story here. And after, 10 minutes of reading, it was fantastic. I mean, to read about all the Hollywood stars that you guys interviewed at such a young age. You're in St. Paul, Minnesota, right? Back in the 70s. And you guys, well, you know what? It's better to tell your story. So Tom, David, take it over.
Okay, I'll start. I'm Tom. Nice to be on Manopause. Good to see you, Mike. You owe me some duck horn next time we meet up.
You got it.
Thank you. But Dave and I go back to junior high school. We met at Highland Park Junior High, and we've been friends for over 40 years. And our whole interest in vintage old-time movie stars started when we saw the film That's Entertainment in 1974, that glorious compilation of MGM musical clips. And we both saw it at a kind of a local theater in the Twin Cities. And we kind of bonded on that. We thought, man, we've never seen stuff like this before. This stuff is amazing. And that led us into this sort of long, career-long thing about where we interviewed all kinds of movie stars. We wanted to meet them. We started a film society to see these movies in their entirety. And I can let Dave sort of elaborate on some of that if he wants.
Well, yeah. So Tom and I met, as he says, St. Paul, Minnesota in middle school. And we both had the shared experience of being taken by our parents to see That's Entertainment at a downtown movie theater. And as Tom said, we didn't want to just see the clips. The film introduced us to so many of these legendary stars, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, Judy Garland, what have you. And so back then, this was before Turner Classic Movies or DVDs. So the only way to see these films in their entirety was to rent them in a 16 millimeter format. And so Tom and I actually would shell out some money to rent these movies. We would actually go to the local Jewish community center in St. Paul and grab their Bell and Howell 16 millimeter projector and schlep them to Minneapolis, St. Paul retirement homes. And the good news was we sort of became de facto film buffs because we had to see these films 4 or 5 times. We just defrayed the cost of renting these films by just splitting it among the nursing homes that were showing it. So as we were, so I guess we were innately, what would you say, publicists at heart, because we managed to generate some news or some press about this local endeavor, which we dubbed Films on Wheels, because that's essentially what it was.
And so that's as our audience was on wheels too, almost everyone.
And we could do a whole podcast on stories of showing them at retirement homes, but that's another story. Anyways, as we were graduating high school in 1978, Tom and I had this preposterous notion that many of these Golden Age stars were in their golden years, but maybe they would see us in Los Angeles. So we started by going, let's start at the top. So we saw Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly, and people today have a hard time, believing the fact that you could actually write them a letter. Snail mail at their home address with a self-addressed stamped envelope. And then we always enclose clips from our Films on Wheels. And lo and behold, Kelly and Astaire green-lighted these visits. So
the summer of our senior year in high school, 1978, we got letters green-lighting the interviews if we could make it out to LA, which there was no way we were not going to do that summer. And we always figured that Astaire and Kelly talked to each other, saying, like, if you'll see these two boneheads from Minnesota, I'll see them, because we had been corresponding with their secretaries for over 2 years. And so we got on a flight. We used to vend all kinds of different like hot dogs and beer and soda at Met Stadium ball games, Twins and Vikings games. And that's how we afforded our about 2.5 week trip out to LA to meet.
So what did your parents think about this, that you guys managed to get interviews with people that I'm sure they idolized?
Well, they couldn't figure it out. They were like,
they didn't discourage it by any stretch.
No, but they must have been like, oh my God, how did you guys do this?
No, I think it was puffed on their cigarettes and thought, we've never figured them out anyway. Let them go. What the hell? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a certain amount of disbelief, and they thought, hey, they could be into drugs or something. Let them go see Fred Astaire. The interesting that the first place we stayed, this was 1978, we couldn't rent a car, and it's sort of hard to get around LA.
Yeah.
And fortunately, in the case of Astaire Kelly, we walked to these interviews. We stayed at a place that's at Doheny and Santa Monica called the Beverly Terrace. And I actually, I'm a pack rat. I actually have the receipt, and it was $26 a night to stay there.
I went back there recently, and it's now $250 a night. And they don't have the pool. They filled in the pool. They had a pool when Dave and I were there. I don't know what.
Oh no! No, that's
I
too
hope
bad.
they cleaned up the roaches too.
Well,
that's how.
Wow.
That was the first place we stayed, and we took city buses and we took some cabs, and that first visit was transformational because not only did we have these memorable meetings with Fred Astaire at his office and Gene Kelly at his home, through sort of a quirk of fate, and it's a long story in the book, we actually had an opportunity to meet George Burns. And the George Burns meeting ended up being somewhat of a friendship in that Tom and I think we saw George 4 or 5 times between 1978 and I think he was 98 years old the last time we saw him. And so Astaire and Kelly, though, just opened the floodgates, as Tom said. We had a photo taken with Fred Astaire, and that was, as we say, our Willy Wonka golden ticket that opened the door. And in college at the University of Minnesota, which we started that fall of '78, we made several trips to Los Angeles and interviewed probably 60 to 70 celebrities.
Amazing.
And then Tom and I continued our collaboration, and we were going pretty aggressively till about the mid-'90s. And at last count, we were at about 250 celebrity interviews all told.
That is amazing. Now, did you sell your interviews to anybody, or how did you make money from that?
Well, we made a few different ways. We were entertainment columnists on the Minnesota Daily, which was the college paper at the University of Minnesota, and they paid beat salaries. I mean, there were people who made a quasi-living at the college paper. So we did a lot of these things for the Minnesota Daily. We wrote for the St. Paul Dispatch, our local city newspaper.
Wow.
We wrote all kinds of feature articles for Hollywood fan magazines, for in-flight airline magazines. We did just a ton of stuff for them. So we just kept busy over and over, through the years.
What we found out is the 90s approached, and with the advent of the internet, Tom and I in the mid-'90s would come back with Rod Steiger and names like that. And of course, because of the internet, and it was the demise of traditional media, or the start of the slide, we would get the feedback, we need younger, hipper stars. And, that's when we did branch out to Dennis Leary and Patrick Swayze and Matt LeBlanc and Jay Leno. So we did have a selection of those, but we really did many of them, not because we were such admirers of their work. It's because that's the people that we could sell.
And was it easier or harder to get them to come on board as time went by? Because nowadays it's very hard to get through the maze of people that protect, these celebrities. Did you find that it got harder?
Yeah, it got a lot harder, Larry. When we first started, a lot of these older stars like Lucille Ball and Astaire and Kelly, Gregory Peck, a lot of these guys are in the book. They were semi-retired, and they also had been brought up in the 30s or 40s during the star system, where they were sort of weaned on publicity. They saw publicity as part of the job, just like acting, like fencing lessons, like horse riding lessons, whatever they were taking at the studio. So that kind of a discipline doesn't just leave after 50 years. They were very gracious. We they had us in their homes a lot of the time, or we met them for lunch. But with the younger stars, they were just many were just disinterested in doing the interviews to begin with. They saw it as a hassle. They had done the movie, they had gotten paid. They really didn't want to do any publicity. And a lot of the personal publicists, those are the people you had to deal with. They were the gatekeepers to the stars. Mm-hmm. They basically, would always ask us, well, can you do a phone interview? And we were, with a lot of the younger stars, it was sort of maybe not. We didn't like to do that because a lot of the color that you would write into a story was gone. It was just a disembodied voice on the other end of the phone, and you didn't know where they were. One, and who shall remain nameless, did the entire interview on the toilet seat. I mean,
while you were there, did you hand them paper or what? Was it toilet paper?
I helped them wipe.
Well, okay, we know it's a male now. Any initials that you can share?
I don't know where they ate or what they ate or something.
No, it was just like, one was in a one was in a limousine, and the guy was honking and swearing in the limousine, and it was like he was driving it, and it was just, it was kind of funny. It was interesting, but it was just sort of bizarre.
Yeah. And the only reason we did
a far cry.
The only reason Tom and I
having tea with them on his terrace, So.
And the only time Tom and I consented to do the phoners was, quite frankly, because we were getting paid the same whether we did it in person or on the phone. And there were exceptions. Someone like Patrick Swayze was a phone interview, but it was like 2 hours. I mean, the guy just wouldn't stop talking, and he was incredibly nice. But I think one of the things we had going for us, particularly during the first wave of interviews, is a couple things. We had youth on our side, and they liked the fact that we were introducing these elderly stars to a college age audience in what was, if not the largest daily college newspaper, one of the largest in the country. Wow. So I think they liked that. The other thing is that we always showed them what we feel is the respect that they deserve. So Tom and I actually got our first suit. We purchased our first suits in the Twin Cities, probably all polyester, I'm not sure. It wasn't my loud, obnoxious bar mitzvah sport coat, but it was actually a suit.
But you still had the receipt, David, so
so that helped too. We generally always had a coat and tie on during these interviews, and I think that resonated.
Yeah, I will tell you one story, just because I remember this. I'm pulling it out of where. One of these women that I will tell you her name. It was an interview on the phone, but it was a good interview. It was Nicolette Sheridan. Remember her?
Oh, yeah.
She's
Michael Bolton's ex-wife.
Right, yes. Desperate Housewives.
I'm talking to her, and she's talking about Telly Savalas being her kind of a surrogate. He raised her and, all of that. And I'm going, okay, this is fine. This is, whatever. And then she goes, Tom, guess what this is? And I hear this zip. And she goes, I'm unzipping something, Tom. Guess what it is? I said, is it your top? She goes, it's my boot, you pervert.
Oh, that's great.
Took the bait.
Now, I know you guys don't go for dirt. I mean, this book is extremely respectful and just kind. And
as are we, by the way.
As are we, of course. But you do have a story about Jaclyn Bissett, and she is one of my all-time favorites. She is a beauty queen, a great actress. And just tell a little bit about that, because it's really funny and it's a little dirty, but only to her dog, of course.
Tom,
so who wants to tell that story?
Well, she lives, I think she still might live up on Benedict Canyon. And we went up there, and it was a rainy day. We went up. It was, as Dave said, we were in our suits and ties, always very respectful. We looked like, we were selling the Watchtower half the time or something. She's just very sweet. She's dressed in sort of she has leather pants on, it was just eye-dropping gorgeous. She was absolutely gorgeous. And we sit down. It's cold day. The fire's going. We're talking with her. And her dog comes into she had a bunch of dogs, and her dog comes in, and starts to kind of, get up on her. And I don't know what was happening with Jacqueline, but the dog was going right for the Y. I mean, it was out of control. Dave and I, being young, Midwestern, nicely brought up kids, were kind of like ignoring it. And the dog was just diving at the Y. I don't know what was going on there. And, and she keeps pushing him off. And she says, "Oh, guys, I'm so embarrassed," and at this point, we're talking about the deep. With
indeed you are, going deep, and she's very upbeat and funny about all that stuff, but the dog is just relentless. So finally, she has to bring him into another room and close the door, and comes back and is all apologetic. And we keep going with the interview, and we're sort of like, all red faced. And then the dog starts yowling and yapping and going insane. And then she had to cancel the interview. She had to say, "Guys, I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with Bowser, but we can't, So Dave and I just sort of walked out in the rain in like a coma. We just couldn't.
But you did make up for it later, right, David? You made up for that interview by doing another interview with her.
Well, no, we actually did one interview with Jacqueline, but the other thing, and Tom alludes to that famous wet T-shirt sequence in the deep.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
And we had talked about, we were talking to her about that, and she said how interesting it was when the deep was being replayed on television in those days, in the early 90s, they would blur out her nipples. And she said, "Isn't that rather odd? Because that draws far more attention to it than if they just left it alone."
Exactly.
And that was a takeaway that we remember.
But didn't you guys follow up with a phone call with her when she was doing an English movie or?
Oh, Tom. Yes, there was a phoner with her.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You know more than we do.
Yes, I read and I listen.
Yeah, no, I can't. It was a phoner, and something about like, do you still own dogs, or yes, it was just one of these sort of monosyllabic kind of reports.
But not the sniffer dog.
We did want her to forget about.
That was 25 years. This dog, although this dog had a lot to live for. I mean,
Yeah, obviously. Well, of course, you also described how she was sitting on the chair. So she kind of left herself open for a dog to kind of head there, I would think.
I mean, she was sort of spread eagle and
there you go.
Raped and she was just drop dead gorgeous. I mean, she, as you guys know, she's just amazingly gorgeous.
Well, the thing is David doing during all of this? Was David excusing himself to go different places, or David
in the cold rain and then come back?
Yeah.
It was out of control.
Yeah.
I wish he was taking photos.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys walked out of there bent over. This is the book, Hollywood Heyday. It's available on Amazon. Was just released a couple years ago. It's fascinating, even for the short attention span person, because each story, there's a bunch of them, like him. They're nice short snippet interviews with stars that you're all going to remember, and watch out for the Manipod podcasts that are going to be coming, because we're going to be talking to them about their experience with people like Don Rickles, Lucille Ball, Bob Hope. They're really going to be fascinating. But it's a really great read, guys, and you do bring us a lot of information about people that we just really don't know, and we're going to dive into those in our subsequent podcasts.
Great. So look forward.
Thanks a lot to being with us today.
And next up is going to be Bob Hope. So will you guys tell us all about the dirt with Bob?
Well, what dirt?
Good stuff.
Like, can't compete with Jacqueline Bissett, though.
That's true. That's true. All right. Well, thanks, guys. It was great. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Sounds good.